of the bracket. But for Juan Naar, we really aren't seeing too much of a difference in the team that they brought from the Players' Cup region finals into the global finals. Juan is still running a team of Raichu, Entei, Celesteela, Politoed, Kingdra, and Rillaboom. The only difference is in the Rillaboom moveset that's going to be used.
Well, we saw this team towards the end of the regional finals, and he played it so well. The way that the Kingdra was played around was absolutely phenomenal, but the presence of that Raichu was also a little bit problematic, I think, for some of his opponents. That being said, we talk about Raichu, obviously a fantastic ability. Could take this Regieleki, which we are excited and interesting to see out of the team decision-making process for Will Tom. You know, when he's at team preview, you've got to respect the Raichu. If you've watched, obviously, the regional finals, you know that Juan likes to lead with it and play around it right off the bat. So I think looking at some of the other fantastic options on his team, the Landorus, the Urshifu, or maybe even just playing this Weather War with the Torkoal and Venusaur combination could be an interesting kind of matchup for these two players.
Absolutely, but we would be remiss not to talk about the accomplishments of these players. For Will Tom, this is going to be a breakout performance for them. Not getting a chance to really get into the top of any of the other competitions that they've been a part of just yet, but already having a strong showing in this Players' Cup #2. But for Juan Naar, this is a different story. Seeing so many special event championships under Juan's belt, as well as that OCIC top 32 in 2019, Juan definitely looking to kind of reclaim some of that glory too.
It's a good tournament to be breaking out in, right? You've already made it to the top 16 in you know, the global finals, and you're already into winners round 2, so you're pushing on quite nicely and trying to make it all the way through these rounds. Of course, Juan, very storied player, been playing a lot in his region, picking up big wins, not just top 4s, but wins at these special events, and of course, fantastic finishes at some of the internationals as well. So both players, you know, in a good position. You're still in the winners bracket. That's exactly where you want to be, but both players want to head to winners round 3, feeling good, just keeping their heads up, keeping their teams rolling exactly how they want.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this matchup just because I feel like the last time we got a chance to see Juan in action, that Kingdra was such an unstoppable force. It was able to take out Pokemon left and right, and really it was honestly the pivotal moment and the pivotal point of that team that Juan built. So it kind of doesn't surprise me that after seeing so much success with that team in region finals, that we are seeing a same team from Juan come out here for the global finals.
The Raichu Kingdra combination was really difficult to deal with, and it forces that Regieleki to stay away, or at least play very, very conservatively, if that's something Will wants to bring. Of course, there was a kind of interesting use of the Kingdra. We usually see it partnered up directly with the Politoed on the field, but Juan Naar was really smart about it and said, you know what, I'll just set up my own rain in the first turn of my Dynamax. So really kind of interesting play to do that and be able to have kind of a slot on the field for support. And that could also really mess up the Venusaur and Torkoal combination, because the Torkoal only really gets to activate the weather when it switches in, unless, of course, it Dynamaxes and max flares. But it kind of gives the advantage, I think, to Juan in he can control the weather a little bit easier.
Yeah, well, let's see whether or not that is going to be the case as we jump into this game #1 between Juan Naar and Will Tom. We will get a chance to see what leads come out onto the field, whether or not that Regieleki is going to make an appearance, and it is going to. For Will, we will see that Regieleki and that Porygon 2, and a very classic and standard lead coming out from Juan with that Kingdra and that Raichu. Now, we were talking about this before, Adam, how that Kingdra and Raichu is such a potent combination for Juan to be able to have at the very beginning, and we get a chance to see from his perspective a little bit more why as he starts selecting those moves.
It really puts a tough position down for this Regieleki, and a lot of people have talked about it, that its move pool isn't the widest and most varied. A lot of its moves are just electric type moves, and it has to respect the presence of the Raichu and play around that. With that in mind, he could then take that advantage and say, well, your Regieleki is going to be taken out of the game for a little bit, so I'm now going to be able to focus down the Porygon 2 and kind of give this Kingdra room to breathe. I mean, looking at those regional finals, this Kingdra was doing a whole lot more than some people would expect. It was taking hits a little bit better, controlling the board a lot for itself, but it's not going to be doing the work this time.
No, in fact, that Kingdra is going to go back into its Pokeball for Rillaboom to take the field now, setting up that grassy terrain, and we will get a chance to see some other moves get selected here as the opposing Regieleki uses the Electro Web. But why, when Raichu is on the field, it's going to get that Lightning Rod proc there for taking out that hit. Rillaboom is still going to be affected, and its speed is going to drop as a result of that. But Raichu is able to fire back with a Nuzzle here onto Porygon 2, paralyzing that Porygon.
Raichu doing one of its most annoying things in being able to nuzzle and get a nice paralysis down. Interesting to paralyze something when you think it might be Trick Rooming. Obviously, that's going to help out. But on the same kind of note, it's curious to see an Electro Web land while you're Trick Rooming as well. I mean, it doesn't really matter. Regieleki is the fastest Pokemon around and is going to be able to capitalize off, you know, putting things a little bit slower. It just kind of messes with the order a little bit in Trick Room. I think Juan's play is very smart here. Take away the electric terrain, reduce the damage of Regieleki. But as you mentioned, he's giving over Lightning Rod boost. Yes, he's being able to hit the partner by using Electro Web, but you're still giving over these Lightning Rod boosts to the Raichu, and that does mean it could become a problem and do a little more damage than it may usually be outputting.
Well, you can see one of the reasons now why Will was trying to set up that Trick Room before. The Porygon 2 is going to be paralyzed now, but because that Trick Room already came through, you are getting a chance to see this Torkoal come onto the field and potentially make use of the speed of which the Trick Room has reversed. But Torkoal gets a Nuzzle too and is paralyzed. Oh no, Juan is really kind of taking this game.
He's trying to do everything he can to reduce the usefulness of Will's Pokemon, right? I mean, he's taken away the Eviolite with the knockoff from that Rillaboom, so the Porygon 2 is going to be a whole lot easier to manage right now. He's got Nuzzles down, which even though is going to help out, I guess, with the speeds in the Trick Room, it does mean there's a chance that your Pokemon just won't get to move, and that is just as useful as blocking a Trick Room in some turns. A really nice double switch here from Juan. He's seen the weather, has been shown already by Will. Says, you know what, I have my own weather. I'm just going to switch it in here and try and go from there. So a nice play, and this Eruption is going to be an interesting one, to say the least.
Yeah, that's not going to be very effective on either the Politoed or the Kingdra upon that switch in. Porygon 2 gets a chance to move, and Kingdra will have to take an Ice Beam on the switch in, but it's not going to be too effective here either. Just kind of doing some chip damage onto this Kingdra, but it's still really healthy, and with the grassy terrain is going to be able to build up even more of that health pool to be able to potentially Dynamax in these future turns.
It doesn't look like it's Dynamaxing right away. Probably wants to wait until the Trick Room is over, but if that's the amount of damage that Will can do in these turns, he's going to be fine just sitting there and saying, okay, you can just attack me during your Trick Room turns. I'll try and weave in some attacks here and there. But until your Trick Room ends, I'm fine just taking these hits. You know, the Torkoal's probably forced out of the field now, purely because the rain is up and it just can't hit those powerful eruptions, especially against these two Pokemon. So the Torkoal needs a much safer time to try and play the game and try and set things up for itself. I think Will's going to have to adapt, and the longer he spends adapting to what's on the field in front of him is the less amount of time he's spending using and capitalizing on the Trick Room he set up a little bit earlier. So this switch could be a little bit interesting if it comes through, but it looks like Will's making a commitment and just saying, you know what, no, I'm just going to play the game with the two I've got.
Yeah, I think as of right now, especially with the Trick Room active, it's going to be good to be able to just kind of take advantage of that change in speed, and especially because both of Will's Pokemon are paralyzed, they are going to have that speed reduction, so it makes them some of the fastest on the field. Kingdra, though, going for that priority protect just to be able to make sure that it's not going to take too much damage, but a Max Flare coming out from the Torkoal right into that protected Kingdra will go through the protect, doesn't do very much there, but importantly resets the weather so that any water type attack that comes out from one side of the field is not going to be as effective either.
That's a smart play from Will. He's got to do something to try and get the board back in his favor, and even though it doesn't really do damage of note, it does mean that he lands at least something in that slot, and he gets control of the weather most vitally. That's really what he needed to see in that turn, and be able to kind of try and play around the next couple turns and the remaining turns of his Trick Room a little bit safer. So I like that. Obviously changing before the Muddy Water comes out, really, really important, because hey, you're going to be able to reduce the damage from that. And this now does become a very weather-centric matchup, I think.
Yeah, it really does. And you could even see that maybe instead of exchanging the Politoed and kind of putting Juan's position into a disadvantageous position, by having to switch around and move board position, you could just Dynamax right away and go for a Max Geyser to be able to reset the weather in your favor. So you're absolutely right about this becoming a very weather-heavy battle, where it's all about kind of getting up the sun or the rain for your respective side of the field in order to dish out as much damage as possible.
Right, and the addition of, obviously, Max Moves has made those weathers even more accessible. There are a number of Pokemon with the certain abilities, such as Drizzle or Drought, but now you can start changing things up in the middle of a turn, which is pretty cool, and something that I think a lot of players have adapted to very, very well since the release of Sword and Shield. That said, this Politoed, not the usual candidate, I think, for Dynamax on one's team, but seems to be doing a pretty solid job here.
Yeah, well, especially because Juan decided to Dynamax that Politoed, it's not going to be taking nearly as much damage coming in from the double up into that slot that we saw from Will. But here comes that Max Geyser, super effective damage, going to bring that Torkoal to about half. And will start the rain, but Hydro Pump comes in too, and that's gonna be a 2-hit knockout here with the critical hit on top of that for the Hydro Pump, and that's going to knock out that Dynamax factor from Will's team.
That's a really, really good use, of course, of the way that these Max Moves works. He sets up the rain, he knows his Kingdra's going to be able to do damage. He's seen that the Porygon's really not doing much damage to him in return, and just said, fine, I'll take the hits, I'll set up the rain, keep my Politoed nice and safe, and yeah, now I'm in a great position to kind of play through the rest of the game. He does, of course, have to watch out for the Regieleki, but because the Trick Room has ended. But Juan has that threat of the Raichu in the back and is able to say, look, I'm just going to sit on this Raichu. If you show me Regieleki, you have to be so cautious about what you do. If you go for a single target electric type attack, then yeah, you're just going to be able to, you know, cause problems that way. So really, really nice options there. Here's the Regieleki, and I think the Raichu switching probably coming through, or at least just being threatened.
Yeah, we'll see whether or not that Kingdra does decide to switch out here, as I don't think Juan is in a position where you really want to switch out that Politoed, especially if you want to take advantage of those Dynamax turns that you have left. And seeing the Regieleki on the field, I feel like this is a really, really smart decision for Juan to take that Kingdra out, keep it a little bit safer, and bring that Raichu back in just in case we do see a single targeted attack. But this is Electro Web again, so this is going to hit both targets on one side of the field. Will hit that Politoed for super effective damage, but Raichu, importantly, will take the brunt of the attack for Kingdra, and Politoed, because it's in that Dynamax form, is still going to be able to hang on here, and Regieleki is not, shall we put it.
Yeah, Regieleki really forced into a corner there. Having to use a spread attack to avoid the threat of Raichu means it can't use one of its bigger attacks, and it does have to use Electro Web, and that means Politoed's still going to be around. In return, Politoed does get to sit there and say, you know what, that's fine. I am just going to launch a huge Max Geyser at you. I've got the rain up still because your Torkoal got knocked out, and that's going to be an easy knockout right there. The Porygon getting paralyzed definitely could be a little bit of a problem, and this Raichu's in a great position now. It can come in, it can fake out. It's done exactly what it needed to do, and just buy some time for itself here. So I think Will is certainly backed into a corner a little bit.
Yeah, even having to bring Urshifu in and just detect right away means that you're not really getting out too much offensive pressure now with the rest of your Pokemon. And even with the detect, that Urshifu is still going to be taking a significant amount of damage coming through from that third Max Geyser, as Porygon's able to move this time around with the Tri-Attack, bringing Raichu just a little bit lower in that health. But this is still a position where Juan seems to be in the driver's seat, and for what Will's going to be able to do here, I think it's going to be really challenging in order to come back from this position.
It's a tough one, and the board has just been so well managed by Juan throughout this whole game. Knowing about the Regieleki, getting the Raichu out and then bringing it back in at the right time has been really, really wise. The Urshifu, though, is going to try and fight back, and there's definitely a way to win games with a late game Urshifu, but it's definitely got a huge task ahead of it here.
Yeah, with the rain up and the muddy water, oh, Urshifu's not going to be hanging on from that one. And now you have a paralyzed Porygon 2 that's going to be trying to fire off as many Tri-Attacks as possible. But Politoed still hangs on here, and Juan still has the option to bring in Kingdra or Rillaboom in the back to be able to just kind of clean up this game number one.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter what it is at this point. Juan's going to be putting himself in a much better position to close out this game than the paralyzed low health Porygon. just not going to be able to buy enough time. In this game, not quite as explosive as some kind of rain teams are. There was a little bit more board positioning and playing around that, but it was so well done. I think both players really put their best foot forward in trying to control the game by controlling the weather, by controlling what was on the field and facing down. But Juan made like a definite advantage for himself in the turn where he manages to get the rain set up with his Politoed.
But let's go ahead and get this game number 2 started and see whether or not that Venusaur does come instead of that Regieleki, because that would definitely switch things up. And we are switching things up, Adam. It is going to be that Venusaur and Porygon 2 coming out for Will, and for Juan, it's going to be the same lead again of that Kingdra and that Raichu. Definitely don't want to stray away from the formula, and it worked so well in that game number 1.
No, absolutely not. I mean, if it's worked out for you in numerous games across your tournament run as well, you're just going to keep on going with it, and it's definitely a good lead. But the Venusaur here, a lot more useful than the Regieleki, I think. The Venusaur can put down more damage without having to resort to a move like Electro Web. And you do have to kind of respect the threat of a potential Torkoal switch in, where, you know, if you don't set up the rain quickly enough, or you set up the rain too early, or even show the Politoed, then the Torkoal comes in and kind of controls the game from there. So I do like this quite a lot from Will as an adaptation. We are already looking at a bit of a change up in the way Juan plays this, and I think we may be going back to something a little more similar to what we've seen before. This Kingdra can do a good amount of work with the Hurricane becoming the max airstream, and that could be a big problem for the Venusaur.
Yeah, the max airstream coming through, or even just using the max geyser in order to set the rain up for itself. But Will is going to have Venusaur go for that protect here, and just in case things get a little dicey, will be able to protect from the fake out coming in from the Raichu. But here comes that max airstream right into the Venusaur, and it's still going to do super effective damage through that protect.
That's a good chunk to take off a Venusaur. I mean, Venusaur's a very bulky Pokemon, but you want to keep its health bar as healthy as possible, and you know, taking out those bits of damage is always going to help. That said, the Porygon's just been left completely alone in this turn. The Venusaur, you know, protected itself from a fake out and the bulk of the damage from max airstream, so now it's going to be able to move first. And this is quite smart from Will, is that he acknowledges that the speed boost would be coming through from something like the max airstream. I mean, he's already the slower pairing on the field, but he gets the Trick Room up, and now would be a really good time for him to push on and try and take advantage of all of that. So Porygon going on the offensive again. We'll see if it can do a little bit more than it did last time, because it did feel underwhelming, and there's a burn to start it out.
There is a burn, but Kingdra avoids the sleep powder that comes through from Venusaur, so it's going to be able to fire off this max airstream, and I feel like that's just a critical miss, because now that Venusaur is knocked out.
Yeah, that's a huge problem for Will. That is something that is going to be quite difficult to bounce back from. I think he does have the tools in there, but putting that Kingdra to sleep would have meant the Venusaur was still around, would have meant that the Venusaur could try and maybe land some attacks or sleep powder, then Dynamax into a Vine Lash. And that's a lot of potential damage from this team that's now going to be missing. The adaptation is fantastic, but it's just fallen short with that sleep powder, and of course the drawback of it being not 100% accurate. So it's tough to watch, but the Urshifu, you know, after the speed boost, guaranteeing everything's faster, may have to just start pulling an extra shift here to make up for the early loss of Venusaur.
You can see the double up going into that Urshifu just because it is going to be carrying that Focus Sash. So that's really smart play from Juan, just to be able to try to knock out that Urshifu. But while that Trick Room is still going to be active and recognizing the kind of speed adjustments that can take place here, it's time for Dynamax. And maybe not the Dynamaxer you might be expecting, but it's going to be Porygon 2 for Will now getting that Dynamax factor. And but it's paralyzed! Adam, oh no!
Oh my, that's quite the conundrum for this Porygon. I mean, you want it to do as much damage as possible. You go, alright, I'm going to Dynamax and start turning some of these attacks into max moves, and one of your 3 turns is already taken away from you by the paralysis getting all the way through there. You're still staring down this Kingdra as well, and the Kingdra's max airstream is also super effective against Urshifu, right? So
yeah,
it's in a good position to just keep dealing damage. Of course, you are just boosting your speeds over and over. That speed boost was, of course, getting put on the Raichu as well, which did get taken out by the Wicked Blow. But you're still in quite the position. And now you get control of the weather. We've not even seen the Max Geyser yet to set up the rain. So Politoed says, you know what? You didn't set it up. I'll do it for you as Dynamax comes to a close. So this Kingdra's still in a really good position. It's got its rain. It does have Swift Swim for when Trick Room ends as well. But this Urshifu and Porygon have taken a rough turn there.
Yeah. Oh, no. You just feel when something like that happens, because it's definitely not a part of the game plan. And because of the Nuzzle that came through earlier, you're already seeing kind of the snowball effect that it's having in this game number 2, where Porygon 2 not being able to use one of its crucial turns of Dynamax here, and it's also staring down a lot of damage coming through from this Politoed and this Kingdra combination. So Torkoal now getting switched out will be able to bring in the weather with it, so it will have that drought ability to reset the sun. But there's still a lot of damage coming through here. But Porygon 2 finally able to move here, gets to go for a Max Strike, and it'll go right into the Kingdra. We'll be able to do a significant chunk of damage to it. But dropping the speed of both of these Pokemon after they've already had that speed boost, just to try to level the playing field a little bit, as the Muddy Water comes through, does connect with the Porygon 2, misses the Torkoal. But Kingdra able to follow that up with a Hydro Pump, and that's doing very little. So Will is still in an okay position.
That's a really good turn for him, actually. I mean, that's a turn where he didn't take much damage at all. The Torkoal got in scot-free and set up the Sun, which may force a Politoed switch out to try and play around that. So, yeah, it's certainly, you know, a helpful turn for him. He does have, I guess, the two most attacking Pokemon on his team in Venusaur and Urshifu. One knocked out, one very, very low. So for that Urshifu to come in and clean up the game, potentially with Sucker Punch, which we saw in game number 1, is going to have to be very, very careful, I think, on exactly how it plays. That said, Torkoal, even against two Pokemon that usually don't really care about it, just going to keep on going with one of its favorite moves.
Wow, that's a lot of damage, even though it's not super effective. You are going to see that critical hit come through onto the Politoed as a Max Strike again, this time into the Politoed. So a double up into that slot here is going to be enough to secure the knockout, as you drop the speed of that Kingdra once again. But the Trick Room is over. So now that we don't have the ability to reset the weather, I don't know how Juan's going to be able to make this Kingdra go faster, given that the Max Strike has now dropped the double airstream that's come through.
The Max Strike's definitely helping out there, and putting this Kingdra back to a much more manageable speed. Of course, your Torkoal's still going to be going pretty late in the turn. It was only 2 Max Strikes, so not as many as you would have liked to have landed if you were well. But this Porygon has certainly opened things up. I mean, this Torkoal, while the sun's up, and as you mentioned, there's no way to reset that weather, is probably feeling pretty good. May have to lay off the eruptions a little bit and try something else. But, you know, heat waves would be good in the sun, and this Kingdra's getting pretty low. That's going to be really the Pokemon pulling its weight in these couple of turns. So, Will, even though he's taken some big hits early on, the Dynamax Porygon has opened up a lot of doors for him, I think.
Yeah, Torkoal's going to go for the Protect here. So this was a smart read coming out from Juan to be able to target into the Porygon 2 slot, maybe expecting that there's going to be a Protect and Trick Room coming out here. But here comes a Draco Meteor, and it's not going to do enough to knock out that Porygon 2 just yet. But Kingdra's special attack is going to harshly fall because of the use of that Draco Meteor. Woodhammer, though, to follow up. Is this going to be enough to knock it out before the Trick Room goes off? And yes, it is.
Yeah, that's a really big play there. To make sure that you get rid of the Porygon. Don't let it maybe, you know, catch the Kingdra on the way there and get some damage down. But, you know, the end of Trick Room meant that Porygon was in a tough position, and the Torkoal not attacking there certainly causing a little bit of a problem. That said, we did get to look at just how useful that Urshifu was, and even clinging on with 1 health from the earlier airstream that it took. It does make Juan play the game a certain way. Around Sucker Punches, right? I mean, don't forget, this is also an open team sheet format, and that becomes very relevant here when you're looking at how to play around with Sucker Punch. If you look at that Rillaboom and know that it can't protect and not, you know, attack, you can land Sucker Punches into it, and then you've just got the Torkoal to come in and try and clean up. So, Really interesting there. A lot of information going over. And Urshifu just, doesn't even try and sucker punch. Just says, you know what, I'm going to just get you before you even get to move.
Yeah, the Wicked Blow coming through is going to do about 2/3 damage to that Rillaboom, but Kingdra's able to fire off with that Hydro Pump, and it's not going to be doing nearly as much damage because of that special attack drop that we saw coming through from that Draco Meteor. But Woodhammer now is going to be doing enough to just bonk that last little HP off of that Urshifu and knock it out. But we haven't gotten a chance to see that Torkoal move yet. Torkoal is going to go for the Heat Wave here. It connects onto both Pokemon, and Kingdra hangs on through all of that.
Kingdra taking that one like an absolute champ, but I think most importantly, the Rillaboom was taken out, and the Rillaboom's probably the bigger damage threat. I mean, we saw the Hydro Pump there, just not enough on this Torkoal, and now it's really up to Juan, I think, to maybe try and stall out the Sun, if that's an option for him, so at least he can do more damage. But that earlier Draco Meteor, on the same turn that he lost his Politoed, he lost some of the switching ability he may have had. Certainly starting to hurt him a little bit here, and allow us to get into this 1v1 Torkoal versus the Kingdra, which, Torkoal probably feeling pretty good about. There's the end of the Sun, and now, we are going to get that little bit of grassy terrain recovery between turns. Could just be enough to swing it. It's really going to be a big turn to see if this Hydro Pump's enough.
Oh, I'm on the edge of my seat right now because this Hydro Pump is the difference between Juan taking home this second game or us going to a game number 3. And it misses! Torkoal gets a chance to fire back with an Earth Power here. And with that Kingdra sitting at 24 HP, that is going to be enough to knock it out. Will has evened up this series, and we are going to a game number 3. I just can't wait to see how everything concludes.
Yeah, I imagine some changes maybe coming through from Juan's side. That was not the comfortable game that we're used to seeing from him. And there's one already, the Entei landing on the field to kick things off. A definite response to, hey, I just saw you bring Venusaur, so I'm not going to let you do that again. And I think the Entei provides a very different pressure. The Entei can also capitalize off the fact that Torkoal has been such a key thing for Will here as well. So a nice adaptation there. Definitely trying to play the game a little bit differently.
Yeah, I really like what Juan is going for right now, just to kind of go for a little bit of damage early on and seeing whether or not you can get a knockout onto this Venusaur before it gets a little bit too dicey. But Venusaur going to protect here as Raichu does go for the fake out this time onto the Porygon 2 instead. And Sacred Fire is not going to land because of that protect, but this is still a great turn for Juan and Will to just kind of get a chance to feel out a little bit about what's going to happen in these next couple of turns.
Very safe turn from both players there, I think. Very, very safe. Covering the Trick Room potentially with the fake out instead of throwing it at the Venusaur like we saw last game. And then just trying to get some big damage down onto this Venusaur. Very, very smart. Just very kind of respectful, I think, of the Porygon and the way that it's been setting up Trick Room now. And the Venusaur knows, yes, this is the bad time for me. Time to leave, get the Torkoal in. While we usually see them together, I think that's a pretty good and potentially very safe exchange for Will here.
Yeah, Entei just gonna protect and play it kind of safe here too. Juan's not really sure what's gonna happen too much in terms of the switches, but the Nuzzle does come through. Torkoal gets paralyzed and might be unable to move in these next couple of turns as the Trick Room finally goes off here from Porygon 2. Might have been trying to set that up in that first turn.
It's still very much a game where you need Trick Room. You're relying on this Torkoal now, and the amount of work that it did in game number 2 is important to make sure it's got that setup. It does get paralyzed for its troubles, which isn't always ideal, but it's certainly not the worst thing in the world, I think, when you're playing in a Trick Room. You're guaranteed to be moving first, but you do, of course, get that downfall of potentially being fully paralyzed and unable to move. But this Entei addition to the team could be really big here. Now the Sun's set up, Entei can hit really, really hard and is now kind of able to capitalize off that a little bit better, I think. Or showing the Torkoal earlier, as we're seeing now from one side, kind of shows his hand a little bit. And now there could be a bit of a problem coming in for him.
Well, Politoed now getting a chance to switch in for the Raichu is going to reset the weather once again. So we are back to those weather wars. But Juan now actually going to go ahead and go for the Dynamax here onto Entei. Entei. So we've seen 3 different Dynamaxers on this team in this set so far, Entei being the 3rd and final choice for this game number 3. And you can see there that Entei is packing Stone Edge, so this is a great way to kind of go for max Rockfall here, but the weather really important to change before this Torkoal goes for the Eruption, and of course Porygon 2 following that up with a Tri-Attack into Entei. No status condition though, so this is a great chance for Entei to fire back with that max Rockfall.
Yep, that's really, really big here, I think, for Juan. That's a huge turn. Using the coverage, making sure that this Torkoal isn't going to be causing you many more problems, right? You just think, I don't want to deal with this. I'm just going to Rockfall it, and I'm going to make sure that your turn, you don't deal any damage, as an easy switch in there to control the weather. So a huge turn there for Juan, I think, you know, being able to set that up. And now this becomes a little bit tricky, because you've got a Trick Room, you've got Venusaur, which, you know, usually would have been great, but you've just lost your weather twice, actually. You know, we're now playing in a sandstorm, and it just becomes very difficult. I mean, the sandstorm as well helps out the Entei. There's no rain set up anymore, so if the Venusaur does show up, can start launching out fire-type attacks and play from there. So certainly a bit of a predicament, I think, for Will on do you just have to show the 4th Pokemon already, or is there something the Venusaur can pull off?
Well, imagine if it's the Urshifu in the back too. That's not really super safe to bring out either because of the Focus Sash that it's carrying in the Sandstorm. It's just gonna break. So you've got to be super, super careful about kind of what you decide to show off as the 4th and final one. But it will be that Venusaur coming out for Will onto the field, and after some pretty long consideration too.
It's a tough decision, and you know, you don't want to mess up game 3 and then get sent down to the losers bracket. So really mulling it over there, and Will thinking, well, if it's Urshifu in the back, which it most likely is based on the way he's been playing the past sets, you want to save that till the end when it can capitalize using its ability to make sure it can get knockouts when people may try and play a little more defensive and hide behind protects and play around that. So definitely a smart way around the game. As Juan says, you know what, I just want the Raichu in again. I can land another fake out at some point and cause problems that way. But Will using one of these choices as his Dynamaxer in this game could make for an interesting showdown. As it is, again, the Porygon 2.
Yeah, Porygon 2, now the choice to Dynamax here. We saw this in game number 2, able to fire off some good max strikes. It's not paralyzed this time around, so we'll definitely be able to fire off this very first max strike, and it's going to be Raichu that has to take that one as it gets switched in. But it's dropping the speed of both of these Pokemon for one, as the Trick Room's going to expire pretty soon here. But Max Flare now coming through right into the Venusaur, and oh, yikes! Resetting the weather again, but most importantly, that's another knockout here.
Yeah, this Venusaur cannot take Max Flares, and that's why I was a little bit shocked when I saw the Porygon 2 actually Dynamaxing here, because that's not usually the candidate. If you get Venusaur to be bulkier, you know, obviously has more health, then it can maybe take one of those and fire back a little bit, but that's not the way that this one's going, and this Dynamax from Entei, if it's 3 knockouts in 3 turns, could be absolutely huge if that's the way that he does end up playing it. So a lot of weight on this Porygon to try and fight back, but talking of control of the weather, you know, we roll right back to the beginning of that turn. The Politoed actually switched out, so is in a great position to come back in and kind of seal up a game whenever it needs to.
Yeah, it really is. You'd just be able to kind of set the weather for itself, even with the muddy waters that we can see coming out from the Politoed. But Raichu's going to take a second max strike. This time it is not going to be able to hold on through... Or wait a minute. Wait a minute.
Oh,
is it just barely
held
on?
It clung on through all of that and is able to keep playing the game. I mean, it did try and get the fake out in this turn. And then, of course, that followed up with an attack into this Urshifu. So
man.
It didn't quite get knocked out, though. And this is the downside of Dynamaxing your Porygon. It's not the most offensive Pokemon. Yes, the max strikes are great for controlling speed, but they're not great for dealing consistent damage and getting those knockouts that you may need. So certainly a bit of a drawback for Will here, and I think Juan is very comfortably in the driving seat. Not quite losing a Pokemon yet, and even though his Dynamax is over, he's definitely got more out of it already. 2 knockouts compared to the potential 1 that this Porygon 2 might be able to get.
Yeah, you can see the NT going for extreme speed, just kind of expecting that Urshifu might be able to fire back with something else. But oh, it's a sucker punch to the Raichu, actually, which is going to be enough to actually knock it out on this turn. As Porygon 2 goes for its third and final max strike into the Entei. And yeah, there's some damage coming out from the Porygon 2, but it does feel like it's just not quite enough.
And this is Entei being able to play around these max strikes with the extreme speed. I mean, there's not much you can do, and in answer to it, you can't start sucker punching it because the priority just doesn't work out. But, you know, you're in a rough position where your Trick Room's ended, you've got one Pokemon really, really slow on the field that's, you know, able to just ignore that with a priority attack. And then it's just been partnered up by another Pokemon with priority. So even if you Trick Room, things don't matter, and you don't have a way to change the terrain up on that one either. So certainly a tough situation for Will to find himself in there. But, you know, he had a really good game too, and maybe looking for kind of a big comeback with the Urshifu at the end here.
Yeah, well, Will's playing it a little bit safe here, recognizing that because Rillaboom can come in, could use that priority Grassy Glide as well, hoping that this Ice Beam's going to be enough. It is super effective, but Sacred Fire able to fire back here into the Porygon 2. And, oh, it gets burned!
Yeah, I mean, still got a little bit of help from the weather there, and help from the burn as well. It's going to make this end game a little bit trickier. Of course, grassy terrain messing with that for now. But this Urshifu is playing super defensive, and the Urshifu needs to be kind of smart about when it decides to attack. I mean, even Sucker Punch is coming under threat now as an option. So this endgame just gets tougher and tougher and requires absolutely perfect play from Will if he wants to even stand a chance in it.
Yeah, but the extreme speeds, again, just one of those ways that the max strikes get completely mitigated because of the increased priority on the move. You're likely going to see Entei moving before any other Pokemon on the field, even with a priority move like the Sucker Punch coming through. So,
yeah, I mean, it's just so tough to kind of back your way out of this corner, I think. And Juan, with the ability to switch Pokemon, makes his life even easier.
Yeah, the Drizzle now coming back onto the field. So we've seen a multitude of weather changes coming through here. I have no idea where in the stadium we are, but we are going to see the extreme speed come through. But Sucker Punch going to fail now because it was targeting down that Rillaboom slot, and Politoed get the switch in. Double up, though, from the Ice Beam is going to freeze Politoed. We are seeing all the status conditions in this game.
I was about to say that Hail hadn't been represented in this match. We haven't seen anyone use Max Hailstorm, but I guess we get close with the freeze, right?
It's pretty close.
Yeah, that's something. Of course, Politoed has options to deal with that, depending on what's on its moveset, so it could be completely irrelevant. Anyway, there he is, just immediately going down from Muddy Water 1 to Scold and saying, I don't want to deal with this anymore. But yeah, I mean, it's been a really well-controlled game by Juan here. Basically being in charge of the field, I think, at pretty much all times. It's been tough for Will to play the game he wanted to play, and as we saw in game 2, which he won, the Torkoal was really, really important there. And the way that he played that Torkoal, as soon as that gets taken away from him, as it was so early in this game, the game gets very, very difficult, as even those Sucker Punch plays just aren't an option when it's just extreme speeding like that.
Well, here comes the Scald now from Politoed after Urshifu gets knocked out, and that is going to be enough to clean up this game. Juan in a commanding position for this game number 3 will take the game and this series.